And we're going to do Flannery O'Connor's Good Country People today, which is quite a story. Um, and let's see, Flannery O'Connor is just I would say America's greatest short story writer, really. I mean, Raymond Carver, another great. We've had a couple good ones. It's not a form where it's usually a form where the people who've written great short stories are usually even better known, for their novels and things like that. Like with Faulkner, one of the last works we talked about. But O'Connor was a remarkable. She was a Catholic, which again is somewhat rare in this. I don't know about rare, but unusual in the South. She wasn't the Southern Episcopalian or Baptist or any of the traditions. Or Southern Protestants. Usually the Catholics tend to have gravitated for whatever reason to the northern cities. She was a very sickly woman, died very young. I think she was only 37. Probably had a lot of great work left in her, and just left a terrific body of work behind. Her most famous story would be "Good Man's Hard to Find," which is even a wilder story probably than this one. But I do think this is just it's just about as good as stories maybe get from it, especially from a pure storytelling perspective, right? And I think somebody asked her one time, and what kind of writer she considered herself to be, and I think she gave an answer that sounds bit strange, but I think it makes sense. That she was a realist of distances, I think was how she put it, and I think that is a good way to sort of maybe start to work your way into filtering and interpreting her work. I think, and I think that realism is. I have to be honest with this. Not my particular favorite style. I'm not a huge. I love. I mean, if you're going to my absolute favorite writers, that's probably the Melville of Moby Dick, and those swashbuckling, enormous sort of the wild, surreal almost sort of characters and imagery and everything. And to say Dickens, what I love about Dickens is that those wild, surreal, sort of half cartoon, half realistic looking characters, and it's that sort of contrast, that I'm always really driven to, and I love stylists, and I love very imagistic and metaphorical and allegorical even writing. And allegory, she's pretty good at, but she's so subtle. And anyway, I'm not a huge. I always went more for Faulkner than Hemingway, put it that way. But boy, O'Connor, it is very. What's difficult for realism to do is it's great at mapping out a culture or a world, right, especially a social world. It seems to be, at least those writers tend to be very good at it. And of course, the greatest realist writers are probably in the 19th, before the screen, before movie theaters were a thing. Before everyone had a TV in their living room, so that's when the heyday. But we've had Raymond Carver in the 1980s was a great realist writer, and there's been other and there's still, and honestly, it seems like most novels now are at least quasi-realist. Maybe even more than that, novels, but novelists, excuse me. But anyway, good. Flannery O'Connor. What's very difficult for a realist writer to get to is the sort of spiritual, metaphysical sort of underpinnings of a world, a society, and which is exactly the kind of thing you use wild metaphor and surrealism and everything to get, right? The thing behind the thing, right? Like those Blake poems we did in the early part of the semester. But I don't know, somehow she gets there, man. And she really is writing about a kind of fall. And again, it's the South. We're a little north, and we're a little further, along temporally, time wise than what William Faulkner's writing about, but no, not too much more. But again, she's not writing about these sort of wild, surreal grotesques that Faulkner's writing about. Any one of these people seem like the nosy neighbor we had, right, Mrs. Freeman in this story, and everything's very recognizable. But she's running about a world that's sort of lost its customs and it's again, the South has sort of fallen. It hasn't quite put itself back together yet. All those manners and somewhat, I guess they say a somewhat abstracted chivalric code almost from Europe, medieval Europe in a way. This seems to be where it would have its origins. Of manners and customs of the old South, right? The Southern gentleman and all that, and religion too. And again, good country people, right? Which gives this story its title. That is, it's the kind of person that can be relied upon. The salt of the earth. We have all these sort of cliches that the women, especially Mrs. Hopewell, and again, these names aren't picked accidentally, right? She's hopeful, and that is sort of what these. What customs and even what religion gives to people is, I think, first of all, it gives you hope in a future, which is required. It seems like for decent mental health and emotional well-being for people, and I think the customs give a recognizable world for every. It is the sort of a kind of social, an invisible glue that kind of keeps society together. And even things like and boy, if you've ever been down south, it's very different. I live in this is speaking this to you from the Northeast, and I'm in Connecticut, but about 45, almost part of New York. I have 45 minutes, probably 50-minute express train. Most of you know this that are watching this, don't you? From New York City, but it's we're very different. Strangers tend not to talk to each other too much or acknowledge one another's presence. But I'll tell you what, my in-laws are down in North Carolina, and anytime I'm down there and I go for a walk or whatever, everyone says good morning to you and greets you, and is sort of friendly. And at first, boy, it kind of freaked me out even at first. But I came to really like it. And there is, again, it's just, good morning doesn't really mean anything, right? You're not really confused. But what it is hi. I'm like you and you're like me, and we're we're part of the same community. That it means more than people who don't have that will ever. It seems like sort of understand, and basically all these sort of cliche and banal conversations that Mrs. Hopewell and her worker, Mrs. Freeman, I believe, are having. They bore the hell out of Joy, aka Holga, which I'll get back to Holga in a second, who is and well, I guess I was just getting into her now, but those two women, they seem to have a sort of connected and a relatively happy life. The two of them, even though one's intensely annoying, at least Miss Freeman is. But the one who's maybe suffering a little bit, especially because of her daughter, who's a grown woman who's 32 years old, and who shot her leg off in an accident, and is from I think just above the knee down. She's got a prosthetic leg, and she's heavy set, and it's possible, who knows what she might have been, or whether that was a fated thing that happened when it was a hunting accident apparently, when she was with her father, who appears to have they think passed on. And her name had been Joy, right? All the connotations to go with the word joy, and she again, she does not. She doesn't want to. She's never kissed a boy, much less. So she's a virgin, obviously unmarried at 32 years old, which almost a little bit of a faux pas in this particular culture, at this particular time, right? And her mother certainly is a bit worried about that, and really feels for her. She is convinced she's unhappy. Of course, she's kind of rolls her eyes at her mom, and that pays very little. And then sort of really looks down on her. She has a PhD in philosophy, which, by the way, that's heavy lifting. Okay, that's not easy to get a PhD in philosophy. That is a lot of serious reading and intricate thinking that would drive most people up a wall. So I mean, she's definitely got some intellectual chops. But is being intellectually smart the same thing as being wise? Maybe not, as we'll see in this story, right? And again, she's O'Connor is, always sort of the younger generation that's looking back at this older generation down south and sort of looking at them as racist, which, yeah, they are and were and often are casually still. We don't really get that in this story, but, in other stories, trust me, it's ever present. You often get the parent who's still extremely, living in a world of white supremacy in their head, if not in reality, and often both. And the child of that parent, often the adult child of that parent, sort of a little bit ashamed of how their parents are and of that whole world. And I do think O'Connor just keeps pointing out over and over again that. Yeah, there was, maybe she's certainly not defending slavery or Jim Crow South or anything like that. I don't know of her ever doing that, but there was actually a lot about that world, the sort of unity, the purpose, the neighborliness, and other customs that maybe were actually a good thing, and maybe there was a way to get rid of one and keep the other. And the younger generations are often made fools of when they think they can just toss these things off and that these things are unimportant, and that something like religion is unimportant. And whether God exists or not is not the important thing about religion, but having a moral code is. And again, it's all based on reciprocity, right? The golden rule is the foundation of Christianity, and really do unto others as we would have done unto us, again, out of the Bible, but that also is the single sort of unsplittable atom at the center of and the heart of all, the beating heart of all human morality, right? And it is what keeps us from descending into chaos. And the chaos is sort of out there waiting, and you have to be a bit careful at casting these things off. And you better have something to replace it if you're going to. You want to reject the old ways, fine. You better put some thought into that. And here is somebody who was, again, PhD in philosophy, extremely smart, and maybe isn't putting enough thought into it, because into her world comes Manny Pinter, right? Who's a sort of yokel, seems like a country bumpkin Bible salesman, right? And who has a heart, but who also has a heart condition and maybe isn't going to live that long. And right away, they seem to have something in common. He seems very interested in her and dinner, but he comes in, puts mom, right on her heels, goes, "Ma'am, yeah, I tell you, I know you're a good Christian woman, ma'am. I know you are, and every Christian household needs to have a Bible in the living room. Where's your Bible?" She's like, "Oh, she's sort of flustered, and she is, again, living in a world, she's not really that religious, and she doesn't, and maybe if she goes to church, she goes because everyone else goes, and I'm not sure if she even does that, but she sets this up on her nightstand. It's not really on her nightstand. She tells a little fibbing about the Bible, no less. Really, it's in the attic, which is not where a good Christian Southern woman in this time and place is supposed to keep the Bible. Let's just say that. So anyway, he manages to talk his way into the house, and he gets invited for dinner, which is the kind of thing good country people do for one another, right? Even if they don't know each other. And again, that kindness to strangers here that we talked about in the Streetcar, and it traces right back to the Greek Homeric epics. I'm not going to spend any time on that, but anyway, this is a functioning. Look, there's a lot of pathologies in this culture, this other culture. You would not want to be a black person in this world at all, okay? But there's also a lot it gets right, and again, maybe what was needed was more of a not to just throw it all out, but to get rid of what needed to got rid of, and keep the sort of community and the things that made community and unity. But Joy, who again has, she's a PhD philosophy student. She rejects good country people and all the nonsense she hears, and she talks about how hypocritical they are. Boy, is she right about that. And what are hypocrites? Hypocrites are people who are, in a deep way, and often in a way they don't even realize themselves, dishonest. Right? They might preach the Bible, but they don't necessarily, but then they'll, treat especially black people, horribly, or other people gossip a lot, which again you see a bit of, especially Mrs. Freeman, right, who Mrs. Hopewell is constantly calling good country people. So she sees all, and she's not necessarily wrong about the hypocrisy. But there's more, but it is an incomplete picture, and she seems to be a little bit blind herself. She seems to define herself about what she can see that others can't, but she seems blind to what she has her own blind spots. So there were scenes before where Mrs. Hopewell found a textbook of hers when she was still in school, and it was basically nihilism. And nihilism is the everything. There is no real meaning. It's all made up. Which, by the way, I think nihilism probably gets it right, but it doesn't matter. We just are not. Human beings are simply not wired to live like that. If there's no meaning, then why not just take whatever the hell, if your neighbor has something and you want it and you get away with it, take it. If you're bigger and stronger than somebody, why not just beat them and take their, whatever it is they have you want. What keeps us from that is these collective stories and myths, and which become our religions, that we all believe in together, and that is what again, that is also, it has an evolutionary purpose. That's what allowed human beings to. There's a great book out there, the *Sapiens*, all about this. It came out about in the last 10 years. Anyway, she reads this, and basically just this nothingness. And it scares the hell out of Mrs. Hopewell, touchingly so much. But Hulga, and again, she's changed her name from Joy to Hulga. And again, Hulga sounds way too close to ugly to be a coincidence, okay? She's rejecting, beauty and all these sort of cultural mores of this world, and is embracing this sort of that nothing means anything, and that she's the one who's actually brave enough to see these things, and these, yokels that are around her are just not, enlightened enough as she is to see these things, and she really considers herself very superior. She also considers herself superior to this young Bible salesman, but I guess she finds him at least a little bit cute or whatever, or attractive enough to serve her purposes. And she does. He's sort of sweet on her and flirting with her, and she agrees to meet him out by the gate. And the reason is she's, it's an experience. Sex is a human experience. It's one she's never had. She's never even kissed a boy, by the way. And she's like, I want to go see what this is like. I'm pretty sure it's not going to mean anything, and I'm not going to be taken in by this way I've seen so many other girls. But I'm at least, much like a scientist, going to perform an experiment here, and try to maybe understand, maybe a deeper understanding, maybe of human nature or something, right? By experiencing this thing called sex. And again, that is not what the cultural norm for it. You're supposed to be, enveloped in, romance and love, and eventually, creating a family and all the, all this ritual, a shared ritual in this culture. She decouples it from all that, right? Or thinks she can. And so and again, we get a clue right away, right? Where she meets him out by the gates. They arrange to meet that night. She sort of sneaks off. She goes to meet him, and right away she's getting she's getting all worked up and furious. She thinks he stood her up, and again, it's because her ego, or that she's the smart one, he's the dumb one, and that the dumb one may be fooled, and she's. But again, very common, thing for a woman to not like. Being stood up by a guy, but also maybe equally common that we do this, right? Yeah, that works in reverse too, right? Guys can tend to fall harder than they maybe normally would for a woman. That can be a bit hard to get too, and it makes the desiring that much more desirous, right? And so when he does show up, and again, it's a great little line there by O'Connor. He sort of comes up right from behind. Like this, right, as he's sort of coming towards her from behind a bush, and almost as if he's rising up out of the ground, right, as if Satan himself. And he is going to be a trickster figure at the very least, and very sacrilegious at the very least, right? As it turns out. But anyway, he does show up, and they go, and they're kissing, and it's very clinical. She doesn't seem to be all that interested in it, but she was okay. I guess it's nice enough, and she's willing to go along with this. And they go to they find a barn. They go up in a hayloft, and they're going to get it on right. And it gets a little bit hot and heavy, and he's kissing her, and all of a sudden, those feelings that she thought meant nothing, all these sort of biological neurochemicals are sort of flowing, and the blood is going, and she's blushing, and all the things that happen to us in those moments, right? And it turns out she's not immune to these things as she thought she was. And there's one point where, again, she looked up and she stared for the first time in her life, to the face of pure innocence. And again, all these people, she's seen the cynicism and the hypocrisy of, but this Bible salesman, there's something about this boy, and he say, you got to say you love me, you got to say you love me, and she won't do it and she's sort of resisting at first, and he's like, well, and he's sort of, and he's playing her. This is a con man, really, as it turns out, right? And he does get her to give in and say it, and then he gives, and this is when he drops the bomb. And so we are not expecting this, right? Even though it's been set up gorgeously, because she is, we already have the condition with the leg, and he whispers in her ear, I want to see where your leg joins on. And she is not ready for that. She whimpers. And again, this is a real deflowering scene. Everything. Imagine if you could go back and reread that passage, man. Imagine this is written as a girl, literally losing her virginity for the first time, and I want to see your private parts, or I want to brass or whatever, all the parts we keep hidden that we then unfold for our lovers, and that are those special sort of intimate times at night, right, to that special someone, but he goes, I want to see where your leg, and she's like, and she's no, and she's just appalled and horrified. But boy, again, this is a ballsy and a seasoned obviously con man. He just kind of keeps at her. He's like, come on, and she's like, what do you want? What? And she's horrified. And we get this she doesn't even let her mom see that part of her, right? She always, and again, that's obviously a deep wound, psychic wound in her, and also, it's just something she's so insecure about, and that's ultimate vulnerability, right? That vulnerability is what we're talking about here. That is what kind of creates the intimacy, is the surrender, right? Traditionally, and the female hero in this act, and that is what happens. And she finally does give in. She's like, and he says to her, "That's what makes you. Why you ain't like anyone else is what makes you special." And right, what every girl kind of wants to hear, and she falls for it, right? This cynical girl who, with the PhD philosophy degree, who can see through everything, and she does, and he sort of looks at her. I think he maybe kisses her down there, and he's looking at her leg, and he's looking at her stand, and she's sort of palpitating, and she's sort of maybe a little bit exhilarated too, and also sort of uncomfortable. And then she's sort of, all right, give it back. She's okay, now give me it back. And boom, he pushes her, her leg away from her. She can't reach it. She's like, oh, in a minute. And he kisses her some more, and she's feeling extremely sort of vulnerable here. And he gets up, and then he pushes her leg even further away, and then she's like. And then he's like, you think you're so special? And then he starts to turn on her, right? He goes, really? You think you're so special? And she's like, but you're a Christian man. You're so bad. He's like, oh, no, but you don't think I believe in that nonsense, do you? Boy, he's every bit as much a non-believer as she is. And maybe I think O'Connor's saying, this is where what non-belief gets us. Somebody who could do something this fucking horrible to someone, right? This is awful what he's doing to her. But it turns out he opens up one of the Bibles. It's one of those hollowed out books, that don't really have pages inside. And inside he's got a flask of liquor in there, playing cards with profane, obviously naked ladies, on them. So I mean, you get gambling, you get illicit sex, and you get liquor, right? All the vices in a fucking fake Bible, right? Like almost like a Jack in the Box sort of coming out of this thing, and he's sort of laughing at her, and she's like, and again, some good country people you turned out to be, and he's like, look, he goes, I'm smarter than you, and then he says, yeah, I don't feel too bad. He goes, I wouldn't try to find me because I never used the same name twice. He says to her, right? And he goes, you know what? I'll tell you something else. Hug her, and says it, kind of the way she meant, like he's saying the word ugly, right? I tell you something else. Hug her. He goes, I'm smarter than you. Any day of the week and twice on Sunday or something like that, he says, all right? And he's got her fucking leg like under, he's got then under her arm, because he goes, don't feel too bad. I got a woman's glass on this way once. You wouldn't believe the things I got, right? So this is just sort of something he does for kicks. And again, just as we saw him sort of, as he was coming toward her, kind of coming up almost as if he was rising out of the ground, he then exits the story, right? Kind of, down the, sorry. down the stairs, walking down the stairs, and she's now stuck there without her leg and has no way out. And he just sort of walks off, and at the end, it's this is her mom and Mrs. Hopewell saying, "Oh, there's that." Ignorant little country boy, good people, but he a little dim, right? As he's sort of walking off in the woods, and poor Helga got the lesson of her life. And anyway, that is a rather remarkable story by Flannery O'Connor. Good country people.